All right. Good evening, everybody. Really happy you've all joined us tonight for our presentation on the City of Tallahassee proposed charter amendments. So, my name's Miriam Teachea. I'm on the board of the League of Women Voters of Tallahassee. For those of you who may not know, the League of Women Voters is a voting rights organization that also addresses social issues that impact voting. We're nonpartisan, a nonprofit, but we are political. We do educate, advocate, and litigate when necessary on issues. So tonight's presentation is education. The league doesn't take a position on any of these, but we just want to help you to understand what these are all about, the context, how they came to be, what a yes vote means, what a no vote means, so that when you leave here, you have a good idea of what's going to be on your ballot. So we're very lucky to have Ernie Paine presenting tonight. He is on our League of Women Voters of Tallahassee's local government committee. He was also a former member of the City of Tallahassee's Independent Ethics Board from 2019 to 2023, and he was on the Tallahassee Charter Review Committee. So he's got a real inside look about how these amendments came to be. So I'm going to turn it over to Ernie now. Just a few housekeeping things. We are going to ask that everyone stays muted. If you have a question, go ahead and type it up in the chat as you think of it. And at the very end, we will address those questions, but we don't want to stop in between. We want to make sure we get to everything. So yeah, you can go ahead, take it from here.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. And does everybody see my first slide?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Miriam. I think you described who I am well enough. I was appointed last fall to the Charter Review Committee, which was responsible for making the recommendations to the City Commission that will lead to the amendments that we'll be discussing here. I want to say, first of all, that we're talking about the Tallahassee Charter Amendments. These amendments will appear on your ballot only if your voting precinct is within the Tallahassee city limits. One of the amendments that will appear on your ballot relates to future charter reviews. So to give you an idea of what you'll be voting on with this amendment, I'll spend some time on the process that was used by the Charter Review Committee to arrive at their recommendations to the City Commission before we discuss the actual 5 amendments that you'll see on your ballot. As you see here, the process is governed by state law, which is subject to change, as we'll see. The Municipal Home Rule Powers Act was passed by the Florida legislature in 1973. This act allowed city governments to make charter changes at the local level. Prior to 1973, desired charter amendments for each city had to be enacted by a special act of the Florida legislature. All municipal charters are filed with the Florida Department of State, along with any amendments, and they must conform to applicable state and federal law. Unlike state constitutional amendments, the Home Rule Powers Act also allows for adoption of city amendments by a simple majority vote, unlike the 60% threshold required for state amendments. There are a variety of ways that state and local law provide for amending the city charter. One method is by ordinance, which would be passed by a majority vote of the City Commission. Statute allows for charter amendments to be passed by ordinance as opposed to by referendum only for relatively minor changes. A voter referendum will be required for major changes like changing city boundaries or changing the general structure or form of government. If it was put into the charter by referendum, it will require a referendum to change it. An example of a change by ordinance was the 2019 ordinance, which applied gender-neutral language throughout the charter. Another way to change the city charter is through citizen initiative by petition. This petition must be signed by 10% of the registered voters of Tallahassee in order to place it on the ballot, bypassing the City Commission altogether. The amendment would become part of the charter with an approval of a simple majority of votes. In 2014, the Citizens for Ethics Reform, failing to get the City Commission at that time to act, initiated a petition which was successful in placing an amendment on the ballot. This amendment created the Independent Ethics Board. It also limited City Commission campaign donations to $250, and it established a campaign contribution refund program for contributors to City Commission candidates, all in an attempt to minimize the influence of money in elected office. The Citizens for Ethics Reform began as a coalition of representatives of 4 private advocacy groups: Common Cause, Integrity Florida, Tea Party Florida, and the League of Women Voters of Tallahassee. Representing the League at the time was former President Marilyn Wills, who passed away last year, but her legacy of strong oversight of government ethics continues. Note that the Florida legislature passed a new law a few years ago prohibiting local restrictions on campaign finance, so the legal limit for campaign contributions went back up to the state's $1,000 maximum. Home rule powers are always subject to state preemption. Another way to amend the charter is if a majority of the City Commission votes to place an item on the ballot. An example here is when, in 1996, the City Commission placed an amendment on the ballot for a directly elected mayor. Previously, the mayor's seat was rotated annually among the commissioners, similar to the way the chairmanship of the Leon County Commission runs. Final way to change the charter is by first using a Charter Review Committee, or CRC, to recommend amendments to the City Commission, which then votes on whether to send them to the ballot. The 1996 amendment that established the directly elected mayor also called for a future CRC to be convened in 2003 for the specific purpose of reviewing the duties and responsibilities of the mayor and recommending any further amendments it deemed appropriate. The amendment mandated a 10-member committee, with each commissioner appointing 2 members. It also required the committee to meet, complete its review, and submit a formal written report within 60 days. The only significant amendment to come out of the 2003 CRC was to schedule a second CRC in January of 2009 with the same format and for the same purpose. Neither committee resulted in any amendments required by statute to go to referendum. Note that there is no legal requirement for a charter review committee to be established in order for the City Commission to submit amendments to referendum. By the end of 2018, there were 4 new faces on the City Commission: Mayor Daley and Commissioners Matlow, Williams Cox, and Elaine Bryant, who was appointed to replace Scott Maddox after his removal. Only Commissioner Richardson remained from the previous year. Shortly after his election, Mayor Daley began talking about his desire to conduct a complete charter review, similar to what he had experienced as a member of the Leon County Commission. Nothing was done about it until June of 2023, when Commissioner Williams Cox introduced the idea at the end of a City Commission meeting. She asked for staff to report back on the proper procedures for conducting a charter review. 10 weeks later, on August 23rd, 2023, after their summer break, the city staff brought an agenda item before the City Commission, stating the statutory requirements and also describing the precedents that have been established by previous charter reviews. As a result, the City Commission followed the previous example of a 10-member charter review committee, with each commissioner appointing 2 members. They also adopted the 60-day time frame that had been used in the past for the committee to develop their recommendations, even though the previous committees had had a much more limited scope assigned to them. They were not full charter reviews. The supervisor of elections had indicated that he needed to have the completed ballot language by June of 2024 in order to get it on the November ballot. So it was determined that the scope of the amendments for the committee to discuss could not be a full charter review, as Mayor Daley had been talking about, but had to be more limited. Since city staff would need time to draft the resulting amendments and ballot language, and there would need to be publicly noticed meetings for public hearings, and for the City Commission to vote on them, the Charter Review Committee would need to submit their recommendations by March 27th. In order to complete the process within this limited time, the City Commission voted on CRC bylaws that would limit the issues that the CRC would consider to these four: the size of the City Commission, the salaries of city commissioners, which is set in the current charter as half that of Leon County commissioners, moving two candidate commission races from August to the general election in November, and providing for a regularly scheduled charter review. During the commission meeting when these issues were voted on, the mayor indicated that other recommendations might be entertained if the CRC felt strongly about them. However, the proposed schedule was accepted based on this more limited scope of 4 items. Before the vote that established the bylaws and scope, some commissioners suggested other topics to be included in the scope of the review. These included single-member districts, a police chief who was directly appointed by the city commission rather than reporting to the deputy city manager as he does now, and also 2 issues that had been previously recommended by the Independent Ethics Board in 2022. First, to define the Ethics Board's jurisdiction over city commissioners to include their duties on external local government bodies, such as the CRA and the Blueprint Intergovernmental Agency. And second, to allow statutory whistleblower authority to the Ethics Board in cases that involve the City Commission. These last 4 suggestions were voted down by the Commission majority as being outside their desired scope, and the bylaws were finalized based on the more limited scope. Both of the recommendations by the Ethics Board had been originally proposed by them in 2022 as ordinances, as part of their recommended revisions to the Ethics Code, which is defined by ordinance. They had been defeated as ordinances on advice of council because they would modify either the jurisdiction or the duties of the Ethics Board, as defined in the charter. So the desired changes would require charter amendments, not ordinances. The substance of the amendments had not been rejected at the time, just the means of enacting them. This was why they were eventually reintroduced as part of this charter review. There were a number of ways that both the City Commission and the CRC tried to involve the public in the process. City Attorney Cassandra Jackson offered a seminar to the public on the nature of the current city charter and the amendment process. A survey was posted early in the process, before the CRC was formed, on the city's website to gather ideas from the public. The Charter Review Committee voted at their first meeting to leave this site up and actively receiving input throughout the review process, and we consulted any new suggestions each week. Also, since the seminar had been sparsely attended, the CRC asked that the video recording of the seminar be posted on the website along with the survey, and it was. The committee also voted to hold some meetings at locations other than City Hall to encourage greater public participation. 2 meetings were held at the Renaissance Building in Frenchtown and 1 at the Smith-Williams Center in the Bond community. Also, public comment was heard at every CRC meeting. The committee was assisted by Treasurer Clerk Jim Cook and some of his staff, as well as by the newly appointed City Attorney Amy Toman. This team provided reams of documentation regarding how various other communities around the state and country had resolved many of these issues. They also brought in a guest from the Florida League of Cities to educate us on how the charter review process had been conducted by other cities in Florida. Audio recordings of all meetings, along with meeting minutes, remain posted on the Treasurer Clerk's webpage on the city's website, talgov.com, and I've been assured that they'll remain there at least through the election. Over a period of 8 weekly meetings, the committee discussed and eventually voted on 4 mandated topics as follows. On the size of the City Commission, the CRC voted 8-2 to recommend the commission remain at 5 members, and so no amendment was recommended. Second, regarding the compensation of the city commissioners, this was the most contentious issue discussed. We explored at least 7 different formulas, But before spending time on them, an initial vote was taken as to whether salaries should increase at all. The vote was 9-1 to come up with some formula for a reasonable increase. The lone dissenter was a former city commissioner. The issue was debated at almost all of the committee meetings, and the vote was delayed until the very end. There were 3 former elected officials on the committee, 2 former city commissioners, and 1 former Wakulla County commissioner. Of these 3, 1 former city commissioner and the former county commissioner said that they felt commissioners were part-time public servants and shouldn't expect to be paid as professionals. Of these former elected officials, the most recently serving city commissioners said that it was now a full-time job and should be paid accordingly. The final recommendation, by a vote of 7-2, with 1 member absent, was to have it set by ordinance based on a later study by another appointed committee, which would be dedicated solely to compensation issues. On the third item, whether 2 candidate commission races would remain on the August primary ballot or move to the November general election, the committee voted 7-3 to move it to November. On the fourth item, would there be subsequent scheduled charter reviews, and if so, how often? The committee examined several possible scheduling models, with attention focusing especially on the fact that Leon County conducts charter reviews every 8 years. Many members felt that if voters were faced with charter amendments for both city and the county on the same ballot, it would be very easy to confuse them and make the ballot overwhelming. The CRC felt that the 2 charter reviews should be staggered, with the county in one cycle, and then the city 4 years later, and then every 8 years after that. It was recommended that the first review be in 6 years to get us into that cycle, and then every 8 years thereafter in order to stagger them. After working all of this out, the vote to recommend this method was unanimous. After voting on the 4 mandated items, in the time remaining over the final 2 meetings, the committee was able to discuss and vote on 2 of the other proposals that had been suggested, which had been initially rejected by the City Commission majority as part of their scope. First, that the jurisdiction of the Ethics Board over city commissioners be explicitly defined as including when they sit on external governmental boards. Second, whistleblower authority granted to the Ethics Board in cases involving city commissioners. The first item was relatively straightforward, and the CRC voted unanimously to send it to the City Commission. The second one was far more complex because the state whistleblower statute is complex. 2 subject matter experts, Ethics Officer Dwight Floyd and Inspector General Dennis Sutton, assisted in explaining it all to us. Mr. Sutton is currently the designated official to handle whistleblower complaints for city government, but he has pointed out that since he reports to the City Commission, he could not legitimately handle such cases involving them. After considerable discussion and an initial vote of 5-4 in favor, the CRC eventually voted to reconsider the vote in order to make a unanimous recommendation, and they then voted unanimously to recommend both of these as amendments. There was no time to consider the other items given the time frame allowed. After receiving the CRC's recommendations on all 6 items, the City Commission made their decisions on what to send to the ballot, accepting only 2 of the amendments in the form recommended by the CRC and choosing to discard the specific recommendations on the others in order to substitute similar items that will appear on the ballot. First, regarding commissioner compensation, the Commission was not satisfied at all with the CRC's recommendation. Commissioner Williams-Cox moved instead, and the Commission voted 3-2, that the city charter mirrored the Leon County Commissioners' salaries, and so that was what they sent to the ballot. Regarding periodic charter reviews, the Commission didn't address the reasoning that went into the recommended formula to stagger charter reviews with the county, but chose instead what they felt was a more reasonable schedule of every 10 years. Regarding whistleblower authority of the Ethics Board over commissioners, the Commission chose to discard that option entirely and to follow instead the Inspector General's separate request to define his office in the charter, rather than as it is now through ordinance. Although he had initially recommended the ethics board solution in 2022, the IG now felt that a better solution would be for the IG to have greater independence. His proposed amendment was that the IG would no longer serve at the pleasure of the city commission, as do the other 3 appointed officers, but would require dismissal for cause by a supermajority or 2/3 vote of the commission. This would remove the conflict that might arise from investigating potential non-compliance by city commissioners, his supervisors. Although the Independent Ethics Board is fully independent of the City Commission, its authority extends only to enforcement of the very narrow ethics code. The IG is more broadly concerned with compliance with city and state law and best practices throughout city government. The City Commission agreed with the IG by a vote of 4-1. The mayor was in opposition to both the Ethics Board's and the Inspector General's proposed amendments. So here are the charter amendments as you'll see them on your ballot, which will be labeled as questions. Question 1. Shall the charter of the City of Tallahassee be amended to provide that members of the City Commission be paid an annual salary equal to the annual salary set by state law for members of the Board of County Commissioners of Leon County, Florida? The current city charter provides for the salaries of city commissioners to be half that of Leon County Commissioners' salaries. The salaries for county commissioners for all 67 counties in Florida are determined by state law based on relative population size, and this is adjusted annually. Leon County has an ordinance on the books which adopts this state formula, and this results in a current salary of just over $90,000. The 1996 City Charter Amendment that provided for a directly elected mayor also provided for the mayor's salary to be equal to that of Leon County Commissioners. Tallahassee is the only incorporated city residing with Leon County, as you probably know. This is probably why the city charter made any correlation at all to county commissioner salaries. In the almost 50 years that I've lived in Tallahassee, whenever the subject came up, I was told by people who seemed to know what they were talking about that county commissioners were considered full-time and city commissioners were part-time. However, this is not mentioned in either the city or the county charters. City and county commissioners set their own work schedules. Some have other jobs and some don't. However, Tallahassee is unusual as a city in that its government structure is larger than the county it resides in. The annual budget for the city of Tallahassee is more than 3 times that of Leon County. The city has at least 4 times the number of employees as the county. Tallahassee also operates its own utilities, airport, and fire services, unlike the county. It's also been pointed out that at least 5 of the 7 county commissioners are elected by a district of only 60,000 people, whereas all city commissioners are elected at large by an electorate of over 200,000. The other 2 county commissioners are elected at large by a county population of about 300,000, but all county commissioners are paid the same salary. However, the job of city commissioners is to set policy and budgets. It's not to actively manage operations or people. They hire professionals to do that. In fact, the city charter explicitly prohibits city commissioners from giving direction to any city employees other than the 4 appointed officials which are defined in the charter: the city manager, the city attorney, the city treasurer clerk, and the city auditor. When considering your vote on this issue, it's important to remember that the city charter is not the place to evaluate job performance of individual city commissioners. That's what elections are for. Charter amendments are intended to address the future. If this amendment passes, the mayor, all city commissioners, and all county commissioners will be paid the same salary per the guidelines of state government. It will effectively double the salaries of all city commissioners except for the mayor, whose salary is currently equal to the county commissioners. If it fails, salaries will remain as they are, at half that of Leon County commissioners' salaries, or currently a little over $45,000 a year for all commissioners except the mayor. Question 2. Shall the charter of the City of Tallahassee be amended to provide that the Independent Ethics Board has jurisdiction over members of the City Commission when they are serving as board members of outside government agencies by reason of their City Commission roles. The current charter provides the Ethics Board jurisdiction over city commissioners, along with all other city employees, but doesn't explicitly say that this jurisdiction applies when they sit as members of external governmental bodies, such as Blueprint Intergovernmental Agency or the Community Redevelopment Agency, the CRA. The legal term for this is ex officio. That is, they sit on these boards solely because they were elected to the office of City Commission. This would clarify that this jurisdiction applies to commissioners in whatever role they serve as elected officials. This is one of two amendments that were sent to the ballot just as the CRC had recommended. There is currently a disagreement in the legal interpretation of the charter in this regard. The Independent Ethics Board has assumed that they already have this jurisdiction, and they have, in fact, processed ethics complaints with regard to alleged actions taken by CRA board members under that assumption. The city attorney has said that they do not have this jurisdiction, since the other agencies are independent legal entities. If this amendment passes, it will codify the Ethics Board's position. Question 3. Shall the charter of the City of Tallahassee be amended to provide that if only two candidates, neither of whom is a write-in candidate, qualify for the same seat on the City Commission, the names of those candidates will appear on the general election ballot instead of the primary election ballot? This is the other amendment that was sent to the ballot just as the Charter Review Committee had recommended. If this amendment passes, the city's election process will match that of Leon County Commission. You may have noticed that there were no county commission races on the ballot this past August, even though there were 3 seats up for re-election. However, none of those races had more than 2 candidates filing to run, so there was no need for a primary. Except for Commissioner Caban, who was re-elected without opposition, the other 2 will be on the November ballot. The current city charter states that all city commission elections will be conducted at the time of the August primary election. If one candidate receives over 50% of the vote, they're elected. If not, the top 2 vote getters will face off in November. However, the city charter calls for all commissioner terms to begin 13 days after the general election. So if a candidate that wins a 2-person race in August happens to be the challenger, the incumbent would remain in office for an additional 3 months, possibly casting critical votes, such as passing the annual budget, which is done at that time, after they had been voted out of office. If the amendment passes, 2-person races would be delayed until the November general election. Since voter turnout at general elections is historically much higher than for primary elections, more voters would probably be involved in the election. Question 4. Shall the charter of the City of Tallahassee be amended to require the City Commission to convene a charter review committee and conduct a review of the charter every 10 years, beginning in June of 2033? Since there is currently no regularly scheduled charter review, if this amendment fails, future reviews would remain on an ad hoc basis at the whim of the City Commission at that time. If this passes, however, not only will charter reviews be conducted every 10 years, but this may be a justification for delaying needed amendments until the next scheduled charter review. For example, when there had been discussion in the past few years about the need for specific charter amendments, the mayor stated that he would oppose any charter amendment in the absence of a full charter review. Remember, there is no requirement in state law, in the current charter, or even if this proposed amendment passes, for a charter review to be conducted in order to pass a charter amendment. All other methods for amending the charter, as allowed by state statute, would remain regardless. Question 5. Shall the charter of the City of Tallahassee be amended to define the role of the Inspector General by charter rather than by ordinance? Although this is the most complex of the charter amendments, the way it's stated here is a bit unclear in my view. The underlying amendment that was drafted to go into the charter is far more detailed. The intent of this amendment is to establish greater independence to the Office of Inspector General, which was established by ordinance in 2020 to provide oversight of city government processes. The IG is tasked with keeping an eye out for public corruption, mismanagement, waste of public money, and other such things. Since it was not defined in the charter at the time, the office could be abolished by a vote of the City Commission if a majority of them didn't like the direction of his investigations. It has in fact been stated that this was one reason why a charter amendment was not pursued at that time. Also, the ordinance that stated the duties of the IG, the ordinance that established the IG stated that his duties would be assumed by the city auditor, who is one of the 4 officials appointed to serve at the pleasure of the City Commission. The city auditor can be fired for any or no reason by majority vote of the City Commission. This violates one of the principal tenets for any office of Inspector General, that it be functionally independent of the agency it oversees. This amendment is an attempt to remedy that. The full text of the amendment behind this ballot language requires a 2/3 vote, currently at least 4 of the 5 commissioners, in order to dismiss any holder of that office. Such dismissal must be for cause, and the Inspector General must be given an opportunity to rebut that cause in a public forum. It will also establish a 5-year term for the office, which is longer than the term of any city commissioner. If this amendment passes, the Inspector General may feel more free to perform his expected duties, even if some commissioners disagree with his agenda, without fearing for his or her own job. If it fails, he will remain an at-will appointee, like the other appointed officials, hoping that a majority of the City Commission approves of actions he takes. There are some questions, but before we get to those, I would like to point you to where you can find the actual text of these amendments, which, as you see, is not very apparent from the ballot language. This website I'm showing right now is the Leon County Supervisor Elections website, leonvotes.org. If you can't remember the URL, you can just Google Leon County Supervisor Elections and you'll get there. We're also putting a link to this site in the chat. If you get to this site, you'll see a header at the top, and one of the options to select is voter education and resources. If you select that and look down at the bottom of the list, you'll see just the facts amendments. This takes you up to a page listing all of the amendments you'll see on the ballot, the state charter, the state constitutional amendments, and below that, the City of Tallahassee charter amendments. If you want to see the full text of the proposed amendment, do not click the link that says full text of the proposed amendment. Where you want to go to see the actual text of the amendment is the link just above that, where it labels the ordinance, which is the ordinance that the City Commission passed in order to send this to the ballot. If you select the link for what's labeled the full text of the proposed amendment, what you'll get is pages and pages of background information that do not contain the full text of the amendment. It might be interesting to go look at for background information, but it can be confusing. It's the same as the case for all 5 of these questions. It's especially confusing and important to keep this straight because the text that's labeled full text of the proposed amendment under question 5 does not have anything to do with the proposed amendment to define the role of Inspector General. It's instead referring to the proposal by the Ethics Board regarding whistleblower. So if I click the link that says Ordinance 24025, what you'll see is an actual text of the draft amendment. It is in draft form, where the language of the current charter is scratched out and the amendments are put in. That's because it doesn't become an actual charter amendment until the voters say it is. But if you go to this draft amendment, you can see on the first section, the way to appoint the Inspector General and the way to dismiss him if that is needed. Section 2 points out the duties and responsibilities of the Office of Inspector General. So that's all I'm going to say about this right now. I see there are some questions. I'll take the questions now. I'll stop sharing the screen. And Mary, we want to read the questions or?
Yeah, so I was wondering, I think it was in the first question. It mentioned a supermajority, but it said a supermajority vote of 3. So I was wondering, how is that different than a regular majority of 5? But does that apply if the commission happened to grow in the future?
Yeah, that's the way the language is. It's an actual 2/3 majority, which is in the text of the amendment. And in a 5-member city commission, that translates to 4 of the 5 commissioners.
Oh, okay. And then I was also wondering in question 4, when it's talking about every 10 years there will be a review, does that mean a full review the way Mayor Daley was talking about, or is that not defined either?
It's not defined. It just says charter review.
Okay.
And traditionally, most charter reviews in general, they don't necessarily go line by line throughout the charter, but at least there's ideally an attempt to look at anything that might be inappropriate in the current charter to recommend for amendment.
And then just so everyone knows, we have a link in the chat to the supervisor page. We also have a link to the treasurer clerk's webpage about the charter review process. I'm also putting in a summary on our league website about these amendments. And then I'm also going to put in an article that Ernie wrote for the Democrat. So this is not from his role in this as an educator tonight. This is more of his personal opinions, but you can get a little bit more of a deep dive into the 5th charter question in there. So does anybody else have any questions? If you can come off mute and ask if that's easier for you than typing, if it's a long question, or I mean, it was a very thorough discussion, so maybe there aren't any. So anybody?
I have a question. This is Terry Cleland. Thank you. That was a great presentation and good resources to look at. I've been voting as we've been going along, but I wanted to ask again about, let's see, the 10-year review. I guess I feel like I need some clarification on that. Like you can't do anything if, let's see, on question 4, you could only look at it every 10 years. You wouldn't, even if the commission voted, like we really need to have this charter change. Okay, you know what I mean.
Yes, I know what you mean. And there is nothing in the proposed amendment that prohibits either charter reviews in the interim period, and it definitely does not prohibit additional amendments being submitted to the ballot by the city commission, the same way the amendment to get the directly elected mayor on there. They can at any time vote to have an amendment. Part of the duties of the Independent Ethics Board is actually to recommend not only ordinances to the ethics code, but also needed charter amendments. They'll still be following that duty because it's part of the city charter. It is always up to the city commission to decide whether or not they submit amendments to the charter, but there's nothing prohibiting that. What it really says is there will at least be a review every 10 years. It shouldn't go beyond 10 years.
Okay, so it's sort of forcing the commission to pay attention to it.
Yes.
Because otherwise, yeah. Okay. So, pros and cons of that one seems pretty low risk in a way, on that decision, but okay. I'm not going to ask you how you're going to vote on it, but I want to.
Although I think an important point Ernie brought up was that it could potentially become an excuse to kick the can down the road on some things if they say, well, let's just wait. So I guess that is a potential aspect on the other side.
That's why I emphasize that it doesn't prohibit interim charter amendments.
Right.
Thank you.
It looks like Darwin's got his hand up.
Yeah, and it's not really Darwin, it's Barry. But I just wanted to make a comment more than a question. I think that a legislature can't bind a future legislature, and that's also part of that that authority, that legislative authority that the commission has in order in this process, for charter amendments.
I'm not sure I follow that.
Well, it's like, well, I think what he's doing is drawing this is Darwin. I think he's drawing an analogy between the legislature and the city commission. A legislature can't bind a future legislature. A city commission, any legislative body, that applies to any legislative body, that a city commission can't bind a future commission. So a city commission now can't say future city commissions can't propose any more amendments to the charter on whatever topic it is, that kind of.
Yeah, the reason to have a city charter is to have something that only the voters control, so that no city commissioner can revoke any part of the city charter without putting it to referendum. So that's the reason for having this established in the charter, that they would be at least every 10 years.
I do have a question though. Has anybody told the supervisor of elections office about the screw up on those links?
That is the responsibility of the city. I alerted the city to the confusion that results. I'm not necessarily sure it is a screw up, just a miscommunication. They did, when I initially alerted the treasurer clerk about the problem there, his staff was already working on it, and that's when the actual ordinance language was posted. It's just that it's up to the city to post what the supervisor displays, but it's the supervisor's website. So the city can't control the labels that it's on their city. So it is confusing, but that's why I tried to alert people to it right now. But
Okay.
the information is there. So
yeah, it's good. Thanks, Ernie.
Do you think
Thank
that
you.
potentially could cast some credibility questions though about this amendment if the voters don't feel like they had access to accurate language about it? Or is that just how
it definitely could. I as a private citizen, it wasn't my place to step into the city's shoes to say
Sure.
what the city did, what the city provided was not quite the best way to do it. I'm not sure what else could be done at this time.
Yeah, no, it's definitely seems like a problem, and so I hope they'll go ahead and get that correct info up there soon.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Well, keep thinking. I do want to tell all of you about we have a Zoom presentation next week about the constitutional amendments. There's 6 of them, and I just put the registration in the chat, and Sabrina, our board member, is going to be leading that one. That's next Tuesday, I believe. It says in the when you click on it, it says. But we would definitely like you to all come to that and share with your friends as well. And also, this recording will be put on YouTube, and we'll send that out to our members. And we also hope you will share that with your friends and family, anybody who lives in the city limits and needs to know about this stuff.
There will also be another event this coming Wednesday at Trinity United Methodist Church, where both Sabrina and I will be tag teaming, and she will do the state charter constitutional amendments, and I will be doing the charter amendments. It is, I'm not sure if it will be recorded. I think it will be recorded, but it will be an in-person meeting at the church, and they're just allowing other members of the church to connect through Zoom. So there is a Zoom component to it.
All right, keep thinking about those questions if you got them. I'm putting in a very brief survey in the chat. If you would please do that for us, just so we can know how we did on this presentation, and just get us a little bit of data going forward. If you could just answer that quick survey, that would be really great. So I'm sure everybody's registered to vote if you're here. Get your vote by mail done as soon as you can. get your voting early plan. Try not to wait till election day. As the supervisor says, that should be your last resort. You don't want to have some kind of emergency that day. So it's better to go vote early if you can, or do that mail-in ballot. Any questions about anything else? Or anything else you want to say, Ernie?
I think that will do it.
I would just like to
Thank you, Marianne.
Ernie, for such a thorough presentation. I think I finally have a better understanding of a lot of the background of how we got these amendments even in front of us. So that's been really helpful for me. So thank you so much. Thank you all for attending. Please share with your friends, and we will get this recording out to you when there's a processing period. So maybe in the next day or so, and we can get it out to everybody. All right. Well, have a good evening, everyone. Please do that.
Thank you.
survey.
Thank you very much. Good
Yeah.
job.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.